Okay, when we left off, I had finished making the display coil. I went ahead and snipped off the, I guess the leads of the wire, took the screw out. So we've got a self-contained coil wrapped around the frame with the PCB board. Well, I guess that's redundant, but the PCB. Once we attach all the electronics, this will be kind of our finished product. So you can see the pins and the electronic components all soldered on. So I will be using this piece as a guide. Even though I've done several, it helps to have something that I can compare as I go. So I'm going to go ahead and clip this into my handy homemade helping hands. Okay, so where to start? I've got quite a few components, and I've found that the best place to start, and this is included in Tony's instructions, is to get some solder on several of these pads so that you have something that you can fix the components onto. Just so you can see what I'm using, I've got here are my tweezers. And here's another pair of much smaller tweezers. Mostly I just use these to move the bits around. Just so people can see what we are working with. There are the components that we are going to do our soldering on. So here's the nose of the tweezers, and just for comparison, here is my finger, and I do not have a monster finger. So just so you can see how small these little bits are. So pretty awesome. Lots of fun soldering these things on. Anyway, so let's back out. Let's zoom in on the display board. There we go. All right. So what I've found is it's easiest to get a little bit of solder on just one side of, or at least on one pad of each component. So right here is where the diode will go. So I typically put a drop there. Here's where one of the capacitors goes. I put a drop on one side. I try not to put a drop on a connecting piece because the solder will flow across, and then I'll have solder on both pads, which makes it just a little bit difficult to get the component to sit flush, because I've not been able to have, I've not had much luck getting it to basically making both sides liquid at the same time. So I try to just do one side at a time. Anyway, I will be putting solder here, several of these pads, but I'll do that really quick, and then we'll see how long the video's gone so far, and I may have to break this up into two separate parts. So let's go ahead and tin the tip. Get just a little bit going. Oh, and the cat is trying to kill herself. That was a little bit more than I wanted. It's a little bit hard with the camera in the way. And I am left-handed, so I typically try to keep my solder as much as possible on the left side. So just a personal preference. And it really doesn't take very much. Just a little bit of, just a little drop. And I'll go ahead and put one here. Okay, so now on to some of the crazy fun part. So with the diode, it's critical that it's pointing the right direction. It's a little bit hard to see, but there's actually one side actually has a little bit of a dark line in it. You can see it's this side, I guess down on this side of the diode, and that needs to be facing this way. So I'm just going to put the light side here. Oop, that was not what I intended. Okay, so it's stuck on. This is actually a lot more difficult than I thought it would be with the camera right there. So hopefully I'm going to lean over here and hopefully I won't get in the way of the lens. If I do, I guess I'll just have to do this all over again. So let's go ahead and start getting these pieces on. So once you've done it a few times, it is not too terrible. It's by no means a cakewalk, but it's definitely doable as long as your hands are relatively steady. I kind of get, just the way that I work, I get into a little bit of a routine, a little bit of a system where I typically do one set of components, and I typically do it in the same order every time, just because I find that it goes a little bit smoother whenever I kind of get into a system, get into a groove. So tweezers are absolutely invaluable. They are totally critical for this. I don't have the best set of tweezers, but they work pretty good for what I'm doing. So there's just one diode. There are 7 of these little teeny tiny capacitors, and these capacitors are definitely the smallest part. They're actually not too hard to get on though, because they're just two-sided. First of all, you just two solder marks. They're square, so they're pretty easy to handle. Looks like I missed one right there. They're pretty easy to handle. The ones that, definitely the hardest piece to work with are these teeny tiny transistors. So let me if I can grab the darn thing. Oh, come on. Sorry. So these little tiny transistors have 3 little feet. Let's see if I can zoom into this. Ooh, didn't like that. Okay, so you can see these. Where's my solder? So I don't know if you can see this, but there's a little foot there and 2 little feet here and here, and they go on. There's one pad, the other, and there's the third. So getting those situated in there is kind of a pain, but once you get the first foot set, then it's not too horrible after that. So let's try to get this one, and I just get it lined up, and I try to push down very lightly on that foot, and it will go right into the solder. So, and that was fixed on just where I wanted it, so that went pretty well. It's a little bit crooked, but as long as it's close enough where you're not going to bridge across, you know, as long as you're not going to get solder from across the feet, you know, from one leg to the other, then you're fine. Definitely don't want to have a short with the solder going between the feet. So so there's that one, and let's twist it around and do this one right here. And I'm sure this is probably pretty boring to a bunch of people, but it's interesting for me. So let's get that little piece on there. All right. And then the last transistor goes right here. I'm trying to burn my hand. It's amazing. You think that your hands are pretty steady, or at least I do, and then when you get down to this teeny tiny size, you realize that they're not as steady as you may think. Okay, so that's that. Basically, we've got all of the components, or at least all of the smaller components set. They are definitely affixed to the board in the right place. This video is already going a little bit long, so I'm going to go ahead and stop it, and in the probably the last video, we will finish cleaning up, getting the solder on the rest of the sides, and getting the pins that the Nixie tubes fit into soldered on as well. So until next time.